What villain was terrifying because they were right? The Reapers from Mass Effect and the original BioWare ending before EA changed it. All they were trying to do was stop advanced races from using so much dark matter that they wiped out all life in the galaxy before other races were allowed to come along. If it wasn't for them, humanity wouldn't just not exist, but every species in the entire cycle, every species in every cycle, everyone would have died as the stars went out, this horrific fast heat death event, over the course of a few thousand years. Except a small group of Leviathans, in the early days of the universe, realized what was going to happen, and sacrificed their entire civilization to save all future life in the galaxy. And when Shepard destroys their ships in the third one, every one of those ships is a museum, a living record of every previous civilization, and they're destroying the only thing that was able to be left from them. To fight the Reapers is to fight against everyone who has ever lived and everyone who ever will live. The Reapers don't just have a point, they've saved more lives than we can even fathom. Their only flaw is that they were never able to find a solution that was better than wiping out civilization every few thousand years and preserving whatever they could find. This is hands down the best answer I've seen by far. Most people seem to have misunderstood the original question. Thank you for nailing it on the head. Nice try, Saren. I'm still picking the destroy ending. The sharks from Sharknado. Can you imagine you're just swimming around, minding your own business, then all of a sudden a tornado picks you up out of nowhere, drops you on land, and now you have to deal with Tara Reid? Yeah, I would start biting people too. Snakes on a plane. The poor snakes are taken from their homes, antagonized and killed. If you know how sharks actually are, you would know that if the ocean was a school, sharks aren't gonna be the bullies, they're the quiet kids. Sharks have sight and that's why they attack humans sometimes, but when they're not hungry, they are very gentle beings and it's not like they were intentionally attacking people. If a tornado picked you up and throw you at some else so fast they die, is it your fault or the tornadoes? This. Magneto is my favorite villain of all time. Every time his motives are brought to light I get that yeah, I kinda get it moment. One of the only good bits out of that god-awful excuse for a Phoenix movie, X3, was just Magneto giving side-eye to the young mutants asking for his tattoos. He just whips out the concentration camp number and stone cold, no one is ever marking me again. Like that was a bad movie, but at least they got that attitude right. Another good one from that movie was Charles Xavier did more for mutants than you will ever know. My single greatest regret is that he had to die for our dream to live. He always did love Charles like a brother. Charles and Eric make my top 10 favorite characters easily. Their genuine care and respect for each other despite being often at odds makes them my favorite character pair in printed media. None of you said the most terrifying one. Joe from the Powerpuff Girls. He wanted to bring free energy and advanced technology to the people. And in one episode he actually did. He made the world an amazing place. And then the Powerpuff Girls ruined it all. I just read his backstory, pretty sad. The professor accidentally created him by spilling chemical X on him. He was a lab assistant at the time, but then after the Powerpuff Girls were created, the professor eventually neglected Mojo and left him to live out on the streets. I never even realized he had a backstory. That's really sad actually. There's a whole episode about it. The professor invites Mojo back into their life and is tricked by Mojo into giving him powers like the Powerpuff Girls. Then he turns on them and tries to take over the town. Red Queen Resident Evil, I have locked down this facility to prevent a world-ending virus. Please could you good guys pay attention and not blow holes in the doors. Except she didn't come out and say it from the beginning. I always hate it when characters say things like you gotta trust me or now's not the time, since that's the only way for plot to move forward. To quote Ryan George, so the movie can happen. Explaining the issue would have been so easy, barely an inconvenience. Scar. He only wanted to be king because he was a second male lion in the pride. which means he is automatically not getting much food and also beaten into submission regularly if he wants to stay in the pride. Aside from that, he isn't allowed to mate at all, only the king gets that. Can we really blame him? Also, he tried to eat Zazu and got in trouble. He says it's natural. Then Zazu says let's make him into a rug. Then in freaking Hercules he was a rug. Scar wanted to bring equality to the poor hyenas who had to live in the Shadowlands where food was rare. He did do that in the second movie where he invited the hyenas to live in the rich lands. The second movie was actually about racism and class system that Kiera and Kovu abolished. They opened the rich lands to the outcasts from the Shadowlands, which is nothing Mufasa ever did. The second Lion King has some of the best songs in Disney animation history. Mr. Wilson from Dennis the Menace. The live-action movie has one of those random scenes you see as a kid that sticks with you your whole life. Mr. Wilson has been cultivating this flower that takes like 40 years to bloom and then dies in 10 seconds. At the moment it's going to bloom, Dennis causes a ruckus and Mr. Wilson misses the blooming he's been working his whole adult life for. Looking back, that's like one of the most disturbing moments I've seen on film, partly because it gets more relatable as I get older. I mean, damn, 40 years. As soon as you mentioned the live-action version, that's the scene that came to mind. I think it was so memorable because all the other shenanigans that happened, he yelled at Dennis, but this time he didn't. I had to rewatch the scene for the quote, but you took something from me that I can never get back. Something that means more to me than you ever will. I don't want to see you. I don't want to know you. Get out of my way. That's real. Those are the words of a heartbroken man. Man, I forgot about that scene. Walter Matthau was a terrific actor. I immediately read that in his voice. Stevie from Wizards of Waverly Place. Her entire goal was to stop families from giving up their magic to just one person in the family. Like, we're really supposed to be rooting against her? It just seemed super out of character for Alex to go against that plan. Edit, thanks for all the upvotes. I got to experience seeing something I put on Reddit appear on my FYP on TikTok for the first time. I was thinking exactly this. Why give up your powers when everyone can have them? Only one member of the family having wizard powers seems unsustainable for the wizarding world. I get it that it was not very nice of her to trap her brother, but she was 100% right. I really thought Alex would do it. I cannot understand how or why did Alex double-cross her. Disney doesn't seem to like revolution. Probably because they don't want a socialist revolution or something. Just another example of propaganda. They ain't no SpongeBob out there inspiring workers to unionize. Count Dooku just straight up told Obi-Wan that the Sith control the Senate. I still love the fact that Dooku tells him this and Obi-Wan knew about the clone army being set up under the Jedi's noses and no one decided to investigate that possible connection until years into the Clone Wars. I always wondered why the Republic accepted an unknown army than a Jedi created 10 years ago. An unknown army created by a Jedi who was dead when he supposedly placed the order. Seriously, the prequel Jedi are massive idiots. They also never asked for a description of Lord Tyrannus from all those that dealt with him. Had they gotten one, they probably would have known how much Dooku and the Sith were behind before like mid-season 7. That's the point though. The Jedi were so up their own butt to notice lol. Really makes you wonder why Obi-Wan sent Luke to train with Yoda considering that he's a colossal dum-dum who couldn't see blatantly obvious red flags right in front of his face. Because that part wasn't written yet lol. But revisionist history would say because he was still a master and most likely had learned from the Jedi's arrogance from the Republic era. Well, sure. But Lucas still knew which pieces had to fit together when he wrote the prequels. It was his idea to make Obi-Wan directly tell Yoda that the Jedi who ordered the clones was known to be dead before the order was placed, and it was also his idea to never once have Yoda follow up on that little piece of trivia. Arya's parents on Pretty Little Liars. They're villainized for not letting their high school daughter date her teacher? Yeah, that relationship was just... like, why normalize that at all? I know why they attempted to normalize it. It was rhetorical and doesn't require an answer and was meant to display the disgust I have with the attempt. It was multiple times too. There were so many inappropriate relationships in that show. I remember when one of the characters who would have been 16 had her older sister's doctor boyfriend come on to her and the family blamed the 16-year-old. It's scary getting older and realizing that when I watched it so young, I didn't see any problems with it. I know the show was trying to aim for teenagers, particularly teenage girls, as her main demographic. I watched it as a 23 to 27-year-old male and I just couldn't get over the fact that Ezra and Arya were a thing. Like the only reason I feel like people got over that fact that it was a teacher dating a minor and that Ezra is a pedophile and a groomer is the fact that the actors who played Arya and Ezra are around the same age. So it was kind of easy for our brain to just kind of let that go for a split second. The replicants from Blade Runner. Used as slaves and given artificially short lives. They just wanted to live and be free. That's kind of the whole point of them as antagonists. They make you question what it means to have a soul or be human at all. But they aren't the antagonists. If anything, they're the foil to further emphasize the very system of being, capitalism, that caused the situation. As far as the plot structure, we call them antagonists because they're the ones the main character, protagonist, is trying to kill and who are trying to kill him. I think they also are generally dangerous, like they'll kill whoever they need to, Tyrell, etc., to accomplish their goals. The fact that our hero is an anti-hero and the replicants are the main victims is the plot twist, but we don't get the benefit of following a replicant and telling their story. It's Deckard's story. I'm going to sharpen this up a bit. They're the antagonists because they are trying to prevent the story goal from being achieved. This is opposed to the protagonist whose structural purpose is to pursue the goal. The main character is the character whose perspective the audience primarily views the story through. And it's main character that has a personal issue that is connected to the resolution of the story goal. Often the main character and protagonist are the same character, but they don't have to be. In The Great Gatsby, for example, Nick Carraway is the main character but Gatsby is the protagonist driving the story forward. Yes, antagonist does not equal villain. An antagonist is the blocking character to the protagonist's goals. I think that's usually called a deuteragonist. In olden times, protagonist and deuteragonist meant most important and second most important character. They basically referred to which actors received top and second billing. Either of these could also be the antagonist because they aren't really referring to a structural element. Antagonist doesn't fit this scheme and is a word put into use much later. And we've mostly changed what we mean by protagonist to complement antagonist because it's much more useful. For what it's worth, deuteragonist is not a very useful term. Second most important character is often extremely difficult to identify and can be highly subjective, and it has no meaning from a structural sense. Edit, typo. I wasn't really terrified of it, but N was right in my opinion when we're talking Pokemon. Dude thought getting these creatures and making them fight till one is knocked out wasn't that amazing of an idea, and it just made sense to kid me. That all said, I think N is a really interesting character that can be interpreted in many different ways. Of all the main leaders of these games, I think N had the best argument. It wasn't perfect though. I like N a lot for his character development. I agree with him at the end. Real Pokemon mistreatment should not be tolerated. But a Pokemon trainer simply using Pokemon in battles does not qualify as mistreatment as the Pokemon is happy. The Pokemon like the trainers, that is the best you should wish for there. All in all, I wish Pokemon had good stories and characters like this again tbh. I wouldn't consider N a villain. More of a rival or anti-hero, like Gladion in Gen 7 or the Emperor in Arcane GA Kill. He's definitely a villain at the beginning of the story. And the beautiful part about N's backstory is it makes perfect sense with his life growing up in Team Plasma. Of course he thinks Pokemon are treated unfairly by humans. He has the ability to converse with Pokemon. And which Pokemon do you think he was able to chat with the most? Oh yeah, the ones that were doing Team Plasma's bidding. Namely, the ones under Getsis. Think about it, you live your entire life growing up and chatting with Pokemon whose sole existence up to that point is for servitude. Of course the first time he meets you, a trainer who presumably loves his Pokemon from the jump, he's rightly confused. Imagine you live your whole life chatting with Pokemon under the thumb of a criminal empire, only to meet one that's genuinely happy to be with its trainer. This is also further reinforced by the fact that, up until his final bout with you, he exclusively uses Pokemon from the route where you fight him at. God, Black and White was so good. It's actually worse. N grew up in a forest full of abused and abandoned Pokemon before even becoming involved with Team Plasma. Of course, the only reason he is exposed to those abused Pokemon is because Getsis made sure that those were the only type of Pokemon he was around. A fellow Gen 5 fan, always a good thing to see. It is also suggested that N is a Pokemon. He wasn't born into Team Plasma, they found him as a child in a forest, raised by Pokemon. The way trainers interact with their Mons is fundamentally different to how he interacts with people in Pokemon. He learns over the course of the story that while that way is different, it still makes everyone happy. He's also got a strange association with Zoroark SP. And this is also the generation that had the book about how people used to marry Pokemon. Wasn't the whole people used to marry Pokemon thing from Gen 4, Diamond, Pearl, Platinum? Maybe. I haven't played Pokemon in like 5 generations now. I got halfway through B and W2. King Kong. Not even because he was right. He was just alive. Minding his own business and blam, taken out of his home and made to be the villain without any choice. A real good example of human nature. Edit a word. I never saw Kong as a villain. Yeah, he is not villain nor hero. He is a wild animal acting on instinct that got sent to a strange land to be a circus act. He was confused by his new restraints and environment, and of course he lashed out. R.I.P. Harambe. Like a lot of the examples here, he isn't a villain per se, but he is a very straightforward antagonist to regular humans or human civilization. So it sorta counts, I think. The movies vary, but I think they all make it clear that it was wrong to take him out of the jungle. Which makes the politics of the original, at least, pretty interesting. Me either. But he was portrayed as one. I am referring to the original. Not the awesome Kong Island. There he was portrayed as a hero. I've always seen him as a force of nature even in the old movies. Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin from Spider-Man, in spite of everything you've done for them, eventually, they will hate you. Dude was right about how the perception of public figures changes over time. I chose my path, you chose the way of the hero. And though they found you amusing for a time, if there's one thing people love more than a hero, it's to see a hero fall, fail, die trying. Don't tell Harry. A word to the not-so-wise about your little girlfriend. Do what you need to with her, then broom her fast. Screenslaver from The Incredibles 2. The monologue given during that movie regularly rings in my head. I'm sure the creepy bass robotic voice doesn't help too. The screenslaver interrupts this program for an important announcement. Don't bother watching the rest. Elastigirl doesn't save the day, she only postpones her defeat. And while she postpones her defeat, you eat chips and watch her invert problems that you are too lazy to deal with. Superheroes are part of a brainless desire to replace true experience with simulation. You don't talk, you watch talk shows. You don't play games, you watch game shows. Travel, relationships, risk, every meaningful experience must be packaged and delivered to you to watch at a distance so that you can remain ever sheltered, ever passive, ever ravenous consumers who can't free themselves to rise from their couches to break a sweat, never anticipate new life. You want superheroes to protect you, and make yourselves ever more powerless in the process. Well, you tell yourselves you're being looked after. That you're inches from being served and your rights are being upheld. So that the system can keep stealing from you, smiling at you all the while. Go ahead, send your supers to stop me. Grab your snacks, watch your screens, and see what happens. You are no longer in control. I am. TLDR, you think everything will always be okay, and while you remain distracted, the powers that be will continue to steal from you. Edit, I'm absolutely loving reading through these replies and how varying our understanding of the monologue can be. It definitely was intended to reach all audiences to say, hey, whatever evil you've perceived as the problem and whatever super you perceived as the solution doesn't matter as long as you remain complacent. Just love it. I always thought Screenslaver was crazy intense for a kid's movie. Syndrome was complex enough as a villain with a proper tragic origin story, and they dialed it up to 11 for the sequel and threw in a hapless sibling who couldn't see past his bias for good measure. Really clever as well that the villain in both Incredibles movies is an ordinary human with a gift for inventing, no superpowers. They really axed any subtlety by naming her Evil Endeavor. I mean, that's part of the hammy comic book charm that Incredibles taps into for me. The fact that her evil endeavor was a horrifically misaimed attempt to prevent humanity from becoming so reliant on superheroes that they could not or would not defend themselves. Even better. Frankenstein's monster. Adam. Created by a short-sighted, arrogant doctor as the first of his race, then denied the opportunity to be part of a community of his own, man-made beings, or the human community. He only became monstrous after it became clear that Frankenstein would never create another of his kind, and was driven mad by his desire to punish Frankenstein's hubris. So, Frankenstein was the monster after all. Knowledge is knowing Frankenstein wasn't the monster. Wisdom is knowing he was. Wisdom is not giving Frankenstein a tomato salad. And charisma is selling Frankenstein a tomato-based fruit salad. Strength is dismantling Frankenstein and putting him into a tomato salad. Constitution is not dying after you eat the Frankenstein-filled tomato salad. Growth is learning from the experience and not eating a fruit salad ever again. The Red Hood. Batman beats insane people up. They go to Arkham, are usually experimented on there, and come back worse. In a way that makes Batman one of the worst perpetuators of Gotham's constant decline into savagery. The Red Hood just straight up kills them. Edit. I made this post yesterday and expected, well, not 800 upvotes. In comics logic, yeah, Red Hood has a point. Since they're apparently incapable of building prisons/institutions that people can't escape from. When they are not constructing deliberately lousy establishments. There was at least one series that had Black Mask's secret identity renovating and running the place. Okay, but in comics logic they're also incapable of making sure someone stays dead. Otto from Wall-E. It was one of the only almost perfectly executed AI villains. He never really talks unless needed because he wasn't programmed to, no malicious motives, does everything efficiently. He's only bad because he's following his programming, protect the humans and don't let them back to Earth. Not out of malicious intent, but it was what he was programmed to do. And his directive isn't even incorrect. Wall-E finding that plant was like finding a 4-leaf clover in a field of grain. The planet was nowhere near habitable, and they barely know how to stand when they get back. In reality, you know, nobody on that axiom is going to make it very far. Edit: some of you missed the main point of the original post and started arguments on how humans could survive. Remember, me thinking they wouldn't make it far alone is only any theory, and I'm not saying it's 100% truth, but I'm kinda tired and I keep getting people saying the same thing, so I thought I would just say that so I could go to sleep and hopefully have a couple less people ticked off when I wake up than I would had I not said that. Edit 2, well, I woke up and this comment blew up a bit. Just want to say that contrary to popular belief, I did watch the end credits. It's a Pixar movie. Did you expect them to actually show civilization fail and die? I just had a theory on what would happen if they went with a more grim approach. They could still live, but they also had a chance they wouldn't. Without the couple minutes end credits thrown in at the last second, it's really just an open-ended question I added one of many answers to. I agree that they shouldn't have made it very far, but in the end I think we see the future where humanity returns. The best villains are those that make you question your own morality and whether serving the greater good is worth the sacrifice of many lives. I don't think those are the best villains. There are good bad guys, and bad questionable bad guys. Thanos was right. Theoretically, yes. But practically, no. In reality, he would have completely thrown off every country in the world by killing some of its leaders and destroying every economy. Cutting all animals randomly in half would probably cause a huge decrease in the male or female population of said species and cause it to collapse in on itself. Snapping things away also won't change the problems that already exist. Kiwis, the garbage islands. And going even more in detail, the ill trauma he would cause would lead to a lot of severe depression and mental health issues that could lead to the death of many more people and even some animals. The power plant workers he snapped away suddenly could cause huge issues because if not enough people can work in the power plants, there will be major issues. And once those power plants stop, people will lose power fast. And that leads to more issues. Especially if he snapped away a bunch of doctors. Because he wanted to choose randomly with no bias, he would probably end up killing more people than he intended and make the world a worse place to live. Ozymandias. He outsmarted the most powerful being in the universe, and won. There actually weren't flaws in his logic or execution. Let me talk, revealing my plan. Classic bad guy mistake until he tells you he triggered it 35 minutes ago and was talking to waste time. This one of the best moments in comic history. Dan, I'm not a Republic serial villain. Do you really think I'd explain my masterstroke if there remained the slightest chance of you affecting its outcome? I did it 35 minutes ago. The guy in Korra who wanted to end special privileges for benders. Perfectly captured that right idea, fascist execution concept and dread. Amon the Equalist. Yeah. Thanks, it was bugging me not remembering his name. Although the show didn't really show that. Every bender in the new city except the Avatar got beat up or used by capitalism. So that's part of the reason. It mirrors the way capitalism exploits privilege for control of labor. In our world for much of history, only whites were really allowed their pick of jobs, and that was used to exploit poor whites. Keep them working hard in the mines and factories, because well, they don't want to be even worse off like those lazy unemployed non-whites, right? Never mind that the non-benders, non-whites, were incapable of working these jobs. The mere privilege of not being even worse off in a lower class was their reward. The Matrix's Agent Smith, I tried to classify your species. I realized that you're not actually mammals. Every mammal on this planet instinctively develops a natural equilibrium with their surrounding environment, but you humans do not. You move to another area, and you multiply until every natural resource is consumed. The only way you can survive is to spread to another area. There is another organism on this planet that follows the same pattern. Do you know what it is? A virus. Human beings are a disease, a cancer of this planet. Dr. Zaius from Planet of the Apes. The entire original series does a really good job in my opinion making the villains right but also the harbingers of their own downfall. But Dr. Zaius is my personal favorite. Dr. Zaius in Beneath the Planet of the Apes has this line which sums up his ideology to a T, paraphrasing as it's been a hot minute. Help you? Why should I help you? Man is evil, capable of nothing but destruction. And the best part is while yes, by refusing to help George he leads to the world being destroyed, he wasn't ever wrong. The end of the first movie has George learned that mankind caused a nuclear apocalypse whilst he was out in space, leaving the other apes to evolve in more or less a wasteland. And the second movie ends with George activating nukes underground in a last-ditch Hail Mary and blowing Earth up. While yes, it could have been avoided if Zaius just helped George, why should he have? Everything from both the apes' religious beliefs and their knowledge of history shows mankind to be an evil, destructive species, and while yes we're also doing good, let's be honest it's always been our destructive efforts that have led more lasting impacts on the world. And the last thing Dr. Zaius experienced was just confirmation of his belief as a human destroyed not only himself, not only Dr. Zaius, but literally the entire planet. Poison Ivy is an environmentalist at heart and Raj Al Ghul is a humanitarian. Both were pushed into extremism after the broken system they're trying to fix simply refused to change for so long that they decided the system itself needed to be torn down. Kyle was always more of an anti-hero, but it's funny how the Gotham City Sirens, three of Batman's most famous rogues, arguably the top three after the Joker, all went on to become full-on heroes more or less. I still think it's funny that Harley Quinn is all but an honorary Bat now herself. She's basically a female Deadpool. Roger the Shrink from Friends. He saw the group for what they were almost immediately and when he called them out on it instead of saying you know what? He's right, we should work on ourselves and not spend the next decade bouncing from one failed relationship to the next. They badmouth him behind his back and throw cookies at him after he leaves the room. He was the hero they needed but didn't deserve. Please like and subscribe for more daily content.